The Kiss Double Platinum album, a tribute unprecedented in music history. Here's Neil Bogart.
For the success story of the decade, Casablanca honors Kiss with Double Platinum. Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Peter Criss, and Ace Frehley.
20 Double Platinum songs remixed and brand new Strutter 78 Kiss Double Platinum.
Hey guys, welcome back to another one of my Kiss album reviews. Today we're going to be talking about Double Platinum. Now, Double Platinum is the album that was released after Kiss Alive 2, and it was released before the solo albums. And it basically was released to tie fans over between the Alive 2 album and the solo albums. So I've got a little bit of details here we're going to talk about. Not going to get too much into this one. Only going to really talk about the changes. I am going to review what I think about the songs, if I like them better or worse than the originals. I am going to come up with a score, but I'm not going to include this in my overall tally because it's a compilation album, and I basically just want to keep up with studio albums and live albums for my overall scores of my albums. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about some stats here. It was released April 2nd, 1978. It was produced by Kiss and Sean Delaney. Casablanca PR indicated that the purpose of this compilation was to collect material from Kiss albums that had all sold double platinum, even though none of the Kiss albums had been certified double platinum by the time of this release, because the only albums that had been certified double platinum, Destroyer and Alive 2, were not certified that status of double platinum until 1996. The album was basically typical Neil Bogart hype and an album to tie fans over while the band recorded their solo albums. 22 tracks were sent to England for remixing by Sean Delaney and Mike Stone for the album, although only 21 would be used. The B-side of Strutter 78 single, Shock Me, is identical to the album version on the Christine 16 single and is not remixed. The album package was an embossed gatefold with the Kiss logo on the outside and the faces of the Kiss members embossed on the inside gatefold. Also included was a Platinum Award and a merchandise form. As far as the charts, this album peaked in the USA at number 22 and spent 24 weeks on the charts. Double Platinum was certified gold and platinum by the RIAA on May the 16th, 1978. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get to the songs. Let's talk about the first song that they actually recorded for the album, Strutter 78. Strutter 78 was re-recorded at Electric Lady in early 78. It was re-recorded to give it a light disco treatment at the request of Neil Bogart. None of the band saw it as necessary to re-record. It's rumored that Sean Delaney played drums on the song, but that hasn't been verified. Now, Strutter 78, I kind of agree with the band. I really didn't see any real reason to redo this. I scored it a 5 on the original album. I scored a 5 on this album. It's not really... Some people like the disco groove to it and everything. I don't really like it all that much. I mean, it's just, like I said, I like it just as much as I do the original. So let's go on to track 2, Do You Love Me?
You like my 7-inch leather heels and going to all of the shows, but do you love me?
Do You Love Me is very similar to the Destroyer version. It only has some minor tweaks in the mix. I scored Do You Love Me an 8 on Destroyer. When I reviewed Destroyer, I just scored an 8. I don't like it any more or any less on this album. So we'll go on to the next track, track 3, Hard Luck Woman.
If never I met you, I'd never have seen you cry. If not for a first hello, we never...
The drums come in later, halfway through the first verse. The mix is tweaked to make the acoustic guitar sound better. but I don't like the mix and the effects that they put on the drums. It has some kind of weird muffled echo delay on the snare and the bass drum, and there's echo on Peter's voice at the end of the song. Now, Hard Luck Woman is a song that I, scored a 6 on the original version, and I scored a 6 on this too. I do like it coming in later with the drums and everything, but then they ruin it because the drums have some kind of weird effect on them when it's like when you hit the bass instead of just boop, it's like boop, boop. It's like it's some kind of muffled reverb that I'm not really a big fan of. So I score this song the same as the original, 6. So we're going to go on to the next track, Calling Dr. Love. I like the way they start the song with Gene repeating the Calling Dr. Love over and over, and then they fade it in and add the guitar. Minor mix and arrangement changes. There's only one repeat of the chorus before the solo, and then some changes in the breaks and the chorus after the solo. Even with the breaks and the changes and the changes and the tweaks on the mix that they do, I still like it just the same. I don't like it any better. I don't like it any worse. I scored it a 7 on the original album. I scored a 7 on this album. So now we're going to move on to Let Me Go Rock and Roll. This is one of my favorite songs on Hotter Than Hell, and I like the way they cleaned up the mix and took out some of the mud. I like the way they make it nice and clean. I scored 7 on the original version of this, and even though it's nice and cleaner and everything, I still don't like it any better. It's still just a 7. It's not enough to warrant to bump it to an 8, and I don't do points on my scoring. I don't do 7.5 or halves or anything like that, so I'm going to keep this one at a 7. So let's go on to the next song, Love Gun. Love Gun sounds untouched mix-wise, and if you're listening straight through the album, you really hear how flat this mix is compared to the Christmas of the previous song, Let Me Go Rock and Roll. Now, I scored Love Gun a 7 on the original album, and I scored Love Gun a 7 on this. It sounds untouched, so I just scored it exactly the same as I did on Love Gun. It's a 7. So now we're going to move on to the next song, God of Thunder. God of Thunder is very similar to the Destroyer version, maybe minor tweaks. The mix on Destroyer sounds really good, the original mix. It almost just sounds like they did some tweaks to clean up the guitars, bring the guitars up, to crisp it up a little bit. God of Thunder sounds really good on the Destroyer album, and so I like it about the same, so I scored it a 6 on Destroyer. I'm scoring it a 6 on this album as well. Now let's move on to the next track. We're going to move on to Firehouse. Firehouse is sped up close to the tempo that it sounds ideal to be played at. I still think the live tempo is a little faster and better, but this song sounds sped up, not only in speed but in tone, and I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of how they removed the siren at the end and started the opening riff again and then faded out over that, but it's still Firehouse and I love it. Now, Firehouse is one of my favorite Kiss songs from the first Kiss album, and I scored it a 7 on that album. But because of them hacking it a little bit at the end and speeding it up to where it almost sounds a little approaching chipmunkish, I'm dropping my score on it for this album and dropping it to a 6. I do not like this version as much as I like the version on the original album. So let's move on to the next track. We're moving on to Hotter Than Hell.
Come on!
Hotter Than Hell is very similar to the album version. There's some minor mix tweaks to clean up the mix a little bit. And I scored Hotter Than Hell a 5 on the original album, and I'm keeping that at the same level on this album as well, so I'm keeping it a 5 here as well. So going to move on to the next track, I Want You.
I want you. I want you. I want you. I want you. You can run, you can hide, but you never get away.
I Want You has a very similar mix to the version on Rock and Roll Over. I scored I Want You a 7 on Rock and Roll Over, and it sounds basically the same. It just sounds a little cleaner. The guitars sound a little cleaner, maybe a little bit of tweak on the mix, but other than that, it's the same. I like it the same, so I scored a 7 on this album too. So we're going to move on to the next track. We're going to move on to Deuce.
Get off and get your crown out of here.
Deuce has a minor tweak in the mix to clean up the overall mix, and it sounds good. There are some mixing changes on the drums too, which sounds good. They also alter the words in the song a little bit in a couple places. Now this is actually a really good version of Deuce. It sounds a lot cleaner than the first album. It's not as muddy as the first album, but I like it about the same. I scored it a 6 on that album, and I'm scoring it a 6 on this album too. So we're going to move on to the next track, 100,000 Years.
Sorry to have taken so long. I must have been a bitch when I was gone. Your mind
100,000 Years has tweaks to the mix to clean things up and make the drums sound cleaner like they did on Deuce, and I'm a fan of that. The guitars are also cleaned up and the mix has changed in them, and it sounds good. Ace's licks are moved to more the front of the mix, and I like that. There are some minor changes to the lyrics and some minor drum pattern changes. I like the changes that they made on this song. Like I said, I think it improved it. It made it sound better. Minor tweaks, minor equalization, but it's still a good song. I liked it a 7 on the first album. I like it and scored a 7 on this album. So we're going to move on to the next track, Detroit Rock City. The opening sequence and the crash are removed off of Detroit Rock City. There are also sections of the song that are removed. The mix is tweaked to clean up a little, effects to the vocal are added, and the overall mix is changed to bring up the vocals, especially the background vocals. I like some of the changes, but I don't like this as much as the Destroyer album version. If you've seen my review of this, you've seen that I've scored Detroit Rock City a 10, because to me this is one of the perfect Kiss songs. But I don't like the changes that they made as far as cutting it up, taking things off, hacking it a little bit. I like some of the mix changes that they did, but I'm not a fan of all of them. So I'm bumping this one down a little bit. I'm knocking it down to scoring it a 9. So we're going to move on to the next track, Rock Bottom, the intro only, in front of She. Now on this song, they really butchered this song, and it kind of pisses me off. They fake you out with the ending at the intro to Rock Bottom, and then after intro is done, you get She, not Rock Bottom. And on top of that, they butcher the end. Instead of finishing the song with a Zeppelin-style outro, they start it, but then they back off, back to the opening riff, and then go back into the first verse and then fade out. I'm not a fan of this song at all. I don't like how they hacked it. I mean, it is totally hacked. It's a hack job. Now, I'm really not a fan of this version at all. I'm not even really scoring Rock Bottom, the intro, because it's just the intro. But on the first album, I think She might have been my favorite song, and I scored it an 8. But I really don't like this version, so I'm dropping it down to a 5. And now we're going to move on to the next song, Rock and Roll All Night. Rock and Roll All Night on here is pretty much the same as the Dress to Kill album version. Very little changes, if any. It doesn't sound like they changed it very much. If they mixed it, they didn't make very significant changes. I scored it a 6 on the album version. I'm scoring it a 6 on this version. And now we're going to move on to the next track. We're going to move on to Beth.
Beth, I hear you calling, but I can't come home right now. Me and the boys are playing.
Beth sounds very close to the Destroyer version. Mixed tweaks to clean up Peter's vocals and make them crisper. Beth sounds very close to the Destroyer version to me. And like I said, they cleaned up Peter's vocals a little bit. But it's still exactly almost like the version on Destroyer. I scored it a 4 on Destroyer. I'm scoring it a 4 on this album as well. Let's move on to the next track, Making Love.
I just hate when the girl says, wait. I really want her by my side. Don't hesitate. I really want her by my side.
Making Love sounds very close to the Rock and Roll Over original. Very minor changes, if any. Now, Making Love is one of my favorite songs off of Rock and Roll Over. I scored it a 9. And it sounds pretty identical to the version on Rock and Roll Over on here too. It does sound like it might have some minor tweaks, but I still scored a 9. So now we're going to move on to the next song, Come On and Love Me.
She's a dancer, a romancer. I'm a Capricorn and she's a Cancer. She saw my picture in a music magazine.
Come On and Love Me is slightly sped up and the mix is tweaked to clean it up. Come On and Love Me is a good song. I like it on the original version. This version, it's pretty much the same. It's cleaned up a little bit, but it's pretty much the same. So I scored a 6 on that version. I'm scoring it a 6 on this version. Now I'm going to move on to Cold Gin. Cold Gin is very close to the original song on the album. Minor mix adjustments, if any. Cold Gin is another one of those songs on this album. It sounds like they barely touched. So I scored it an 8 on the first album. I love this song. And I'm going to go ahead and score it an 8 on this album as well because it's just equally as good. So we're going to move on to the last track. We're going to move on to Black Diamond.
Out on the streets for a living. Bitches only begun. Your day is sorrow and madness.
Black Diamond begins with a short acoustic intro before Paul sings, and it does not have the slowdown of the tape at the end. Instead, it goes back into the acoustic intro with Paul singing the introduction. I like these changes, but I don't like the effect they put on Peter's vocals. It's distracting. They also made some mix changes to clean up the guitars, the drums, the background vocals, and Ace Solo is definitely not mixed loud enough. Black Diamond is a great song. It's one of my favorite songs off the first album also as well. I scored it a 7 on the first album, and I'm scoring it a 7 on this album as well. I like the changes they made, especially cutting off that end that slows down. That's one of the things that caused me to score it lower on the first album. But the fact that they make some weird changes to Peter's vocals, and it's almost like sometimes it's like they bring the harmony vocals up to the same level as the main vocals, and I just didn't like it. For me, I don't like it. And so that wraps up Double Platinum, and like I said, I'm going to go ahead and talk about my score. Even though I'm not scoring this, I'm not going to put this in with the rest of the album, because the rest of the other albums, because I'm not scoring it with the rest of the other albums. But so on my total score, I scored 131 for the total. And you divide that by 20, that gives us 6.55. Now, I'm not going to run back down through the songs because it's just too many songs to run back down through. So like I said, this gives a 6.55 on this one. So that actually puts it, if I was scoring it somewhere, it actually puts it close to the bottom. It puts it about 2/3 down. So, but I just don't want to score it in with the rest of the albums. Just don't want to do it. So anyway, what do you guys think about Double Platinum? Is it one of your albums that you like? Is it essential? To some people, I think it's an essential album just for the packaging alone. I think it's an essential album. So that's going to do it for today. Be sure to click on my face to subscribe and leave a comment below. Give us a like, and we'll see you next time.